Welcome, welcome to another episode of Glorious Life on Wheels. You know, I have been a rolling stone lately. Been to Pismo Beach, up and down the California coast, Arizona. I'm just telling you, Palm Springs. But I've been rolling with some good food, and I'm going to bring you one of those dishes today. So if you haven't subscribed, hit that button and subscribe so you can see some of this great food. And go back and check some of my interviews I've done on van tours in the last 2 weeks. Amazing, amazing. But we're getting on to rolling with some good food. So let's get started. Come on and join me. Today, I am going to make something that usually is made in the oven. Shepherd's pie, and it is so yummy, but you can make it on top of the stove. And one of the things in shepherd's pie is mashed potatoes. And my brother Donald hipped me to these mashed potatoes, and they are really good. I'm going to doctor them up a little bit, but they're really delicious. So you can use this for your shepherd's pie. So I'm going to show you. First thing, you follow the directions back here, but you do a little bit differently. This calls for 2 cups of water, and I am going to use chicken broth, mostly chicken broth and a little bit of water. But you know what? Let me get my gloves on here because I give this food afterwards what's left to the homeless. So I do like when I'm cooking for other people to wear my gloves. So we're all set now with my gloves, and what it calls for is 2 cups of water. So I'm going to use this beef broth, and that's about 14 ounces, 14 and a half ounces, and I'm going to use another about 1.5 ounces of water, maybe not quite. And then you're going to bring that to a boil. And I'm going to also drop some butter in here to give it a little more richness. Oops. And I'll show you one other thing I'm going to do after this gets to a boil. But it's so simple. All you're going to do is once this comes to a boil, you're going to add your potatoes, mix them up really well, and let them set for 5 minutes. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add about a tablespoon or so of sour cream, and that's going to make it just a little bit more tangy, which I like that little tang to it. But we'll be back in a second when this boils, and I'll show you just how to drop these potatoes in and go. All right, it looks like it is boiling. So all you have to do, very simple, just remove these potatoes from the fire. I'm going to put them up here. You just add the mashed potatoes to the liquid. Stir it up really good. Good, and stir it up, and then you just let it sit for a minute, and that's it. And these mashed potatoes are ready to go. Now I told you I'm going to add a little bit of sour cream, and I'll do that just before I add them to the top of the shepherd's pie. But for right now, we're all ready. So we're going to start, and I'm going to show you how to make the main part of the shepherd's pie. So let's get going. All right, now we're going to make the filling for the shepherd's pie. What you're going to need is, I'm using about 1 pound of ground beef. The main ingredients are the ground beef. I'm using a package of peas and carrots, some onions. I'm going to use some chopped or minced garlic, ketchup, and I'm not using a lot of ketchup, just enough ketchup to bring the flavors all together. The little bit of sugar in the ketchup brings the flavors all together. And then, of course, I'm going to be adding the mashed potatoes on top. And then I'll have a little bit of seasoned salt. But remember, I'm going to use broth in here. I forgot. I have, here it is, beef broth. Some more beef broth. So I'm not going to use a lot of salt. I'll sample this before I put the potatoes on. And if I need to add more salt, I'll do it then. Of course, I'm going to use onion powder. I'm going to use a little bit of parsley, garlic powder. You all know how I love garlic powder. And then I'm going to use a smidgen of pepper and some rosemary. I really like rosemary in my shepherd's pie. Now, what I'm doing is I like cooking my meat first because then I don't have to add extra oil. The oil that comes from the meat, I'm going to use that once I get going here to get my onions sauteed. And I will cook the onions, let them get translucent. I will add the peas and carrots, let them get tender, and then I will add my seasoning, my other things, but I'll show you. So let's let this meat cook up a bit, and then I'll show you what we're going to do once it gets cooked up. We'll go ahead and start. Now you see how the oil is coming here from the meat? So because of the oil that's coming out of the meat, I don't need to add any extra oil to saute my onions and my carrots. So once the meat gets a little more done, I'll add the carrots and the onions and let them saute. And I'll show you that in a few moments. All right, I'm going to go ahead and add my onions here. I'm going to let them cook for a few minutes. And then as they're cooking, I will add my carrots and my peas in a few minutes. And then I'll add my garlic last. You can see the pink is almost gone from the meat, so now I'm going to add my peas and carrots. And I'm adding a small bag about, this is, how many cups is this? This is about 16 ounces, but you don't have to add that much if you don't want to. I just like to have a good amount of peas and carrots in my shepherd's pie here. So I'm going to turn this down to medium and let this cook for maybe about 10 minutes until the carrots and peas are pretty well tender. So you can see how the meat is all interspersed there with the peas and carrots. And we'll be back again. Very simple. It's really just basically drop and go. You're dropping everything in, letting it cook, adding another ingredient, letting it cook, and then just at the end you'll be adding your seasonings and then your mashed potatoes. Doesn't get much more simple than this. Oh, and if you want to, you don't have to use ground beef. You can use turkey instead of ground beef. Or if you want to go completely vegan, a few weeks ago I showed you some vegan tacos and I substituted the meat with chickpeas and mushrooms. I crushed up the chickpeas and added mushrooms. So you could do that with your peas and carrots as a substitute for meat. And then with the mashed potatoes, just don't add the butter. And I'm going to add cheese on top of this, but you don't have to. So you can make a shepherd's pie without the meat. But again, as I tell you all the time, spices are the king of these dishes. So if you have the right spices, you can easily do it without meat. So we'll come back. This is going to get these veggies tender here. We'll come back and we'll be back in a few. All right, these onions are starting to look kind of translucent there. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to add about a cup of beef broth to here. Then I'm going to add my other seasonings. I'm going to add about 2 tablespoons of, well, you know I can't say Worcestershire sauce, so I'll just say the W sauce. About 2 tablespoons of that. Then I'm going to add about a little splash of pepper, not too much. I'm going to add a little bit of onion powder, even though I have onions. And you don't have to add onions. You can just add your onion powder, because I know some of my viewers don't like onions. I'm going to add garlic powder. Well, hold on, I'll do that in a second. Let me go ahead and add my seasoned salt. Whichever kind you like, you can use. I like Soul seasoning salt. And then I'm going to add my rosemary. I love rosemary, about maybe a teaspoon of rosemary. Maybe a little more rosemary in here. And then I'm going to mix that up really good. Mix that up good so the rosemary can get all mixed up in here. This is smelling so good, I'm telling you. And I think I'm going to add a little more broth because I want to make some gravy. And I like to have a little more broth when I make my gravy. So I'm going to add maybe another cup of broth in here. I'm doing it by eye, but you might want to measure. That's up to you. Now I'm going to also be adding, as I told you, I would add my garlic, and I add a little bit of the juice that gives it a little bit of flavor. So I'm going to mix that up there good. Get my, oh my goodness, this is looking good. And I'm going to turn this down now, and I'm going to let it simmer. But the last thing I'm going to add is my ketchup, because as I said, the sugar in that ketchup just brings all of these flavors together. I don't know what's happening with my ketchup top, but you know what? I'll just do it the easy way. Take the top completely off. I'm going to put about 2 tablespoons of ketchup in here. And as I said, that's going to bring all of those flavors together. And let me get that all mixed up here. Oh, I wish you all could smell how this is coming together. Ooh, boy. Now I got to add. I'm going to let this simmer for a while, a few minutes, so all of these flavors can marry and marinate in here. And we'll be back and we'll do the final touches. But this is down now on a simmer just to let the seasonings really seep in here. And then I've got to add a slurry. I showed you before how you make a slurry to thicken it up, and I'll show you again in a minute. This is just perfect. In the time that I had the camera off, I did decide it just needed a little more of the seasoned salt. And what I decided to do was add some Tony Chachery, and that did the trick. That just really added the boost that this needed. So now what I have here, and I'll show you, I have a slurry that I've made with cornstarch. I only used about a cup or less, about a cup of broth, about a tablespoon of cornstarch. Or what you can do is you can add about a cup of broth and some of this flavoring from here, and about a tablespoon of flour, or 2 tablespoons of flour. But you need to get it all good and mixed up. So you see, you don't see any of the cornstarch here. Now I'm going to add this to this, and what it's going to do is it's going to thicken up my gravy in here, so that I'm going to have a nice gravy. And I'm going to let this, you can see it's already starting to thicken up, and I'm going to let this thicken up a bit and then I'm going to add the mashed potatoes on top. You can see it's already starting to thicken up. The gravy is starting to get a little thicker. Now I'm going to put this down kind of on maybe a medium to low because I don't want to scorch this. But you can see how this is going to thicken right up. And while that is thickening up, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add the sour cream to my mashed potatoes. Let me get a spoon out here, and I'm going to add about 2 tablespoons of this sour cream to these potatoes, and I'm going to mix this up really good here. You can see that my potatoes are, it just gives it a tang that I just really like. Now, I know you're not used to having kind of brown mashed potatoes, but because of the beef broth, that's why it's a little bit brown. Now, I'm going to let that, just for a second, let that gravy thicken up. We'll be back. I'll put this on top, add the cheese, and you'll see how it turns out. You can see now that this gravy is just about the consistency that I wanted. It's thick, but not like mud, but it's not runny either, and it's nice and juicy. So I'm going to turn this gas off for a second while I spoon up the mashed potatoes on top of here. And then I'm going to get a fork, and I am going to spread these mashed potatoes all over here. Yipes, got a good gob there. And we're going to spread this out. And I'm being careful here so I don't get the juice all on top of the mashed potatoes, but I am getting a little bit on there. And I'll come back when I finish spreading this all out, but you can see how I'm doing it. All right, you can see how this looks. Actually, I could have used 2 packages of those potatoes or a package and a half, but this is going to be still very delicious. It's just not quite as thick as I usually like the potato topping. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add, to make this extra decadent, I'm going to add cheese all across the top here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cook this until, just heat it up again until the cheese is all melted. Now it's up to you how much cheese you want, but this is how I like it. So we're going to turn this back on. I had the gas off because I didn't want to scorch it and didn't want to burn myself. Keep it on about medium. I'm going to cover this up here, and we're going to come back once this is all the cheese is melted, and we're going to do the favorite, my favorite. You can see the steam is coming up a little bit. My favorite part, the tasting. So stay tuned. We'll be there soon. I had so much gravy in here that some of the gravy seeped through, but that doesn't change the wonderful, amazing taste. But you can see as I move this around how it's very firm. But oh my goodness. Let's go ahead and let's cut into it and see how this is going to taste. Oh, I can hardly wait. I didn't have lunch today, so I'm hungry enough to eat a bear, but I think this is going to do instead of a bear. I'll be right back. Well, this stove top shepherd's pie got very, very juicy. So I think I put a little more broth than I usually do, but it is looking so good and moist and tender. So, it is, it doesn't look like my shepherd's pies usually look, but it sure tastes like one, and it is sure amazing. This is, I didn't have, like I said, I didn't have lunch today. So all this, let me show you the peas, the carrots. It's just savory, just delicious. This is good to the last bite. Thank you so much for coming by and watching me as I'm experimenting more and more on stovetop recipes for you. And this is just, oh, I forgot, the cheese that I used is the Costco cheese that has the 4 blends of different cheeses. You can use just cheddar, but I like the cheese that has several cheeses in it. It just adds and just enriches the taste even more. But I am going to let you go so I can get back to this and finish this amazing dish. Thank you so much. We are just traveling all over, having fun, meeting people. Again, if you didn't see the interview that I just uploaded a couple days ago with a lady named Fee, 63 years old, who had some very difficult circumstances and just didn't let them get her down and moved into a minivan. So go back and check that out if you haven't. But meanwhile, I'm going back to this delicious shepherd's pie, and I will see you Saturday on the live. Take care. May your journey be filled with joy and blessings. Till next time, bon appetit.